I stood just inside the threshold of my childhood home, the front door clicking shut behind me like the ceiling of a vault. The air was thick with something unspoken, tension, maybe, or a memory left out too long. The scent of lemon polish and stale air filled my lungs, a reminder of weekends I used to spend scrubbing these floors while my mother, Diane, screamed at me from the other room to be more useful. But today, it was quiet. Almost too quiet. My heels tapped across the hardwood floors as I entered the living room. Everyone was already seated, like they'd been waiting long enough to get annoyed, but not long enough to storm out. Diane sat dead center on the couch, her posture unnaturally upright, as if posing for a campaign poster. To her left was my stepfather, Ron, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. My half-sister Ashley, 20 and still believing the world owed her something, sat scrolling through her phone. And then there were the two unfamiliar men in tailored suits, both with folders laid neatly in their laps. Lawyers. Of course. Emily, Diane said, her voice coated in an artificial sweetness that instantly put me on edge. So glad you could make it. I'd like you to meet our attorneys. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, the perfect posture, the carefully neutral expression, the red lipstick a shade too bold for a casual family gathering. My gaze flicked to the lawyers, then back to her. You said this was a family meeting. It is, she said, her smile sharpening. And these gentlemen are here to help, mediate, if necessary. It was then I knew. This wasn't a meeting, it was an ambush. But I kept my voice even. Before we get into anything, maybe we should talk about the last time we were all in a room together. 2 weeks ago. At the reading of Grandpa Paul's will. The room shifted. Ashley stopped scrolling. Ron's eyes narrowed. Diane's jaw tightened, just slightly. I took a slow breath and let the memory wash over me. 2 weeks earlier. I remember sitting in the law office like it was yesterday. The walls were lined with dark mahogany shelves filled with thick legal books that probably hadn't been touched in decades. Mr. Wexler, my grandfather's estate attorney, looked like he belonged in that room, silver-haired, soft-spoken, with a voice like sandpaper on silk. Diane wore black, but not like she was in mourning. More like she was trying to sell grief on a magazine cover. Ashley was crying before the reading even began, dramatic sniffles that earned her glances from everyone but sympathy from no one. Ron sat beside them both, a man who had mastered the art of being present but never involved. Mr. Wexler cleared his throat and began. The beginning was routine, a few thousand to a local charity, heirlooms to distant cousins, a retirement bonus for Grandpa Paul's loyal groundskeeper, Mitchell. I was waiting for the part that would sting. I'd always assumed the estate would be divided, maybe a third to Diane, a portion to Ashley, some to me as a nice gesture. That would have made sense. But then Wexler said my name. To my granddaughter, Emily Claire Carter, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes the main residence, the lake house in Michigan, the savings and investment accounts totaling $1.84 million, and ownership of the Carter Hardware Company and all associated assets. Silence. Complete, aching, terrifying silence. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I just stared at the words hanging in the air like a chandelier someone forgot to anchor. Diane was the first to speak. Excuse me, she barked. There's clearly been a mistake. There's no mistake, Mrs. Carter, Mr. Wexler replied, flipping to a notarized page. Your father made the changes 6 months before his passing. He was of sound mind and had all relevant documents witnessed. I can assure you, it's binding. He was sick. He was confused. With respect, ma'am, his notes and video declaration make his intentions very clear. I remember Diane's face, the exact moment her mask cracked. Rage shimmered behind her eyes like wildfire. Ashley let out a whimper. Ron leaned forward, about to say something, but thought better of it. I sat frozen, my stomach in knots. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I never wanted to take everything. But he left it all, to me. Back in the living room, I blinked the memory away and faced Diane, who was now sipping from a glass of lemon water like we weren't seconds away from exploding. "You seemed fine calling me a manipulative little parasite that day," I said. "What changed?" She smiled, small and unkind. "Well, I've had time to reflect." "I think we all have." Ron gave a tight nod. "We're a family. And families figure things out." I nearly laughed. "Is that what this is? A negotiation?" Ashley finally looked up. "Look, Em. You know Grandpa wasn't thinking clearly. He was old, sick, and probably lonely. I don't know what you said to him, but—" "I didn't say anything," I snapped, sharper than I meant to. "He made his choice." "Yeah," she muttered. "A stupid one." Diane leaned forward. "He made an emotional choice. You were the golden girl. The one who got out. Of course he wanted to reward that. But that doesn't mean the rest of us should suffer for it." "You mean it doesn't mean you shouldn't have to give up your entitlement," I said, standing straighter. "You weren't there when he had his heart scare last year. You didn't visit him when he was recovering from surgery." "I did. Every week. You only showed up when you needed something, a loan, a cosigner, a second chance." Diane's smile faded. "Careful, Emily." I ignored her. My voice was trembling, but I didn't care. "He used to write me letters. Did you know that? Handwritten, on that old yellow paper he liked. Every birthday, every holiday. He told me how proud he was. How he wished he could have been a better father. And how he hoped I wouldn't turn out like you." She flinched. "I think you should leave," Ron said quietly. But Diane wasn't done. Her voice turned cold. "Do you really think you're the victim here? You think inheriting that money makes you special? It makes you a target. Everyone's going to come for you now. Taxes, lawyers, friends, strangers. You're not ready." "I am," I said, surprising even myself. And I was. Because deep down, I knew what Grandpa had seen. Not just loyalty. Not just blood. But trust. He trusted me with everything he'd built. The stores. The properties. His legacy. And that scared them more than anything. That night, I sat alone in the driveway for nearly an hour, hands on the wheel, staring at the house I once called home. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage. And I'd just finished Act 1. The inheritance hadn't made me rich. It had made me dangerous to people who had always assumed I'd be too polite to fight back. But I wasn't the same girl they remembered. And I wasn't backing down. It was after midnight when I finally left the driveway, the house behind me now dim, still, and silent. I drove aimlessly, headlights cutting through the darkness of familiar streets, the night air dense with unsaid words. As I turned into the quiet lane that led to my apartment, a low ache settled in my chest, the kind that comes when the foundation of everything you knew starts to crack beneath you. I didn't sleep much. Just lay awake staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in lazy, hypnotic circles. My thoughts drifted again and again to Grandpa Paul. His warm, calloused hand closing around mine. His voice, deep and gravelly from decades of smoking cigars he always said he'd quit but never did, telling me I had the family backbone. And in the moments between memory and exhaustion, I started to realize something: this wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. My legacy. When morning came, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the lake house. It sat like a jewel at the edge of Stillwater Lake, a 2-story wooden cabin with wraparound porches and thick pine trees towering above it. My grandfather had built it with his own hands. Literally. There were pictures of him hammering the beams, sawdust clinging to his sleeves, sweat soaking through his flannel. He used to call it his real home. The place looked exactly as I remembered. The shutters were still painted dark green, the steps still creaked on the third one from the top, and the rusty wind chime over the porch door still chimed softly in the breeze. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled like cedar wood and memories. And in the middle of it all, a photo, one I hadn't seen in years. It sat on the mantel above the fireplace, me, at 8 years old, sitting on Grandpa's shoulders, laughing so hard my cheeks were red. He was grinning too, one arm balancing me, the other holding a fishing rod. That summer had been one of the best in my life. We stayed out here for weeks while my mother was finding herself with some man from her yoga class in Sedona. She didn't call once. I walked slowly through each room, running my fingers along the wood-paneled walls, letting the silence wrap around me. Then, in the study, his study, I found the box. It was labeled Emily. Just my name. Black marker on a cardboard lid, slightly faded. Inside, I found everything. Old drawings I'd made as a kid, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Birthday cards I had sent him, every single one saved. Even a crumpled receipt from the school bookstore where I'd once used my lunch money to buy him a #1grandpa keychain. And at the bottom, letters. Not ones to him. Ones from him. Letters he never sent. The first was dated the day I graduated high school. I should be sitting in the audience today, but Diane said I'd be a distraction. Said it was your day, not mine. But my heart's there, Em. I hope you know that. Another, from the year I started college. Diane emptied the education fund. She told me you didn't want it. I know that's a lie. But you didn't ask for help. You just found another way. That's who you are. Page after page. Year after year. Thoughts he never shared aloud. Feelings he kept hidden. And pain, so much pain. I failed her, Emily. I made her think love was measured in money. I won't make the same mistake with you. By the time I finished reading, tears had stained the paper. The ache in my chest had deepened, not just from grief, but from clarity. I thought of my childhood, how Grandpa used to slip me $10 bills in secret and tell me not to tell Diane. How he taught me to fish, how to change a tire, how to balance a checkbook when I was only 10. He taught me the value of work. Of time. Of respect. And my mother? She taught me fear. I remember being 7, hiding under the kitchen table as she screamed at Ron about a credit card bill. I remember her grabbing me by the wrist so hard once that I had finger-shaped bruises for a week, and being told not to embarrass her when the school nurse asked what happened. Even now, I could hear her voice echoing in my head. Don't act so innocent. You think you're better than me? Because you got your degree? Because Daddy liked you more? The truth is, she was jealous. Not just of the inheritance, but of me. Of what I had with Grandpa. Of what she never could. The next day, I went to visit Mitchell, Grandpa's old groundskeeper. He lived in a modest cottage a few miles from the lake house, surrounded by tomato plants and wind spinners that clanged in the breeze. He opened the door and blinked in surprise. Well, I'll be damned, he said, voice cracking with emotion. Little Emily. We sat on his porch, sipping sweet tea while he told me stories, real ones. About how Diane had tried to force Grandpa to sell the business in the early 2000s, claiming she'd deserved her share before he was dead. How she'd once tried to take a mortgage out on the lake house without telling him. And how, the last year of his life, she suddenly started showing up with casseroles and plastic smiles. Your granddad saw right through it, Mitchell said. But he was lonely. Still hoped she'd change. I nodded slowly. She won't. No, he agreed. But you already have. That evening, I returned to my apartment and opened a fresh journal. On the first page, I wrote. He didn't raise me in the traditional sense. But he raised me. In ways that mattered more. The next morning, a text from Diane lit up my phone. "We need to talk. This isn't over." Of course it wasn't. Back in the city, the battle lines were being drawn. Diane had already contacted a second attorney and sent me a formal letter requesting mediation regarding asset redistribution in the interest of family unity. It sounded noble. It was garbage. But instead of reacting with fear, like I would have a year ago, I read the letter, printed it, folded it in half, and placed it in a drawer. I had bigger plans. I spent the next week meeting with Grandpa's business advisors, reviewing accounts, talking with managers at Carter Hardware. For the first time, I saw the full scope of what he'd left behind, not just in money, but in people. Employees who'd been with him 20, 30 years. A culture built on trust. A legacy that was more than a bank statement. And they all kept saying the same thing. "He said you'd come. That you'd take care of it." I didn't just feel ownership. I felt obligation. But not the kind Diane tried to guilt me into. The kind that mattered. That Sunday, I drove back to the lake house again. Just me, the water, and a notepad full of ideas. But before I got out of the car, I looked in the rearview mirror and asked myself a question I hadn't dared ask before. What if he chose me, not just because he loved me, but because he knew I'd protect it from her? Because she hadn't just failed as a daughter. She'd failed as a human being. And now, everything he built was in my hands. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was responsibility. And I wasn't going to let him down. The first sign of escalation came in the form of a bouquet. It arrived at my apartment door, wrapped in lavender tissue with a white card tacked between the stems. It smelled like lilacs and manipulation. "Emily, let's not let money divide us. We're still family. Let's talk. Love, Mom." The handwriting was too perfect, it looked like someone else wrote it. Probably Rachel, my cousin who majored in graphic design and now worked at a stationery store. I tossed the card onto my kitchen counter without reading it twice. But I kept the flowers. Not because I was sentimental, but because I knew how much it would irritate her if she thought her peace offering had succeeded. The next day, Diane texted again. "Sunday brunch. 11 a.m. At your aunt's house. Please come. No drama. Promise." I didn't reply. On Saturday night, I got a call from Rachel. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear how far they'd go. "Hey, Em. Just checking in," Rachel said casually, like we hadn't ignored each other for years. "You're checking in?" I asked. "Yeah, I mean, with everything going on, I figured you might want someone to talk to. You know, outside of the legal stuff." I didn't say anything. Let the silence fill the line. "Mom's really upset," she continued. "She feels blindsided. You know, she expected your grandpa to take care of her." "He did take care of her," I said, sharper than I intended. "For 52 years. Maybe not in the way she wanted, but she was never on the street. She always had someone cleaning up her mess." Another pause. "I'm not here to fight," she replied carefully. "We're just worried about you. You're worried about the money. That's not fair, Em." "No," I said, "what's not fair is how everyone disappeared when he got sick, and now suddenly they're all at brunch with lawyers." I hung up. The next morning, I did go to brunch. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew if I didn't show up, they'd just twist the narrative. That I was selfish. That I was hiding. That I was being unstable, which was Diane's favorite insult when I stood my ground. Aunt Valerie's house was exactly as I remembered, faux French farmhouse decor, chandeliers too big for the room, and a table filled with enough food to feed a retirement home. Everyone looked up when I walked in. My mother smiled. That tight, brittle smile that never touched her eyes. Emily, she said, standing to kiss me on the cheek. You look tired. Good to see you, too. Rachel sat on one side of the table, Jason on the other. Even Craig, my stepfather, made an appearance, his arm resting possessively over the back of Diane's chair. I sat across from them, and the silence that followed was as stiff as the linen napkins. We're glad you came, Diane began, her tone low and composed, as if we were in a courtroom instead of a dining room. I'm here to listen, I replied flatly. That's it. She reached for her water glass, took a slow sip. We don't want things to get ugly. Too late. Rachel tried to chime in, her voice sweet and artificial. It's just that Grandpa never explained why he made the will that way. I mean, it seems a little extreme. He did explain, I said. He wrote a letter. And he told me. He made his decision with a clear mind. My mother's face twitched, but she quickly recovered. We're not here to debate his decision, she said, even though that was exactly why we were here. We're here to talk about what comes next. What comes next, I repeated, voice cold. You mean, how to get me to sign everything over to you? She put her fork down. Don't be so dramatic. No, I said, leaning forward. Let's be honest. You never wanted me to be part of this family until there was something in it for you. Grandpa knew that. He saw it. And now you're trying to guilt me into giving up everything he left me. Rachel cleared her throat. No one's asking you to give up everything. Oh please, I scoffed. You sent 2 lawyers to our last meeting. Craig finally spoke, his voice low and patronizing. You don't understand how this kind of money works. Your mom's been managing things like this for decades. You mean spending, I snapped. The air turned sharp. I could see Diane clench her jaw. We're your family, she said, that brittle smile now cracking. Don't forget who raised you. You didn't raise me, I said softly but firmly. Grandpa did. For a second, the room was silent. No one even breathed. And then, Diane slammed her hand on the table so hard her wineglass tipped. I sacrificed for you, she shouted. You have no idea what I gave up, the years I spent being judged by him. You think he was some saint? He made me feel like a failure every day. Maybe because you kept proving him right, I whispered. Her eyes flashed, and suddenly she was standing, pointing at me like I was 10 years old again. You think you're better than us? Because you got some degree and a bunch of stocks and a damn lake house? Let me tell you something, Emily, blood matters more than paper. And if you think you can cut us out and just walk away with everything, you're in for a rude awakening. Craig stood up, too. You'll be hearing from our attorneys. I stood slowly. Let them call. And I walked out. Over the next 2 weeks, the campaign intensified. My inbox filled with messages from distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. Old friends of my mother showed up in my DMs with vague, polite suggestions that family's more important than pride. Rachel emailed me a spreadsheet titled Proposed Distribution Plan, like she was negotiating a startup deal instead of trying to gut my inheritance. But the worst came from Diane. Voicemails. Long ones. You have no idea what you're doing, Emily. You don't understand how lonely he was. I was the one who took care of him when no one else would. Do you even remember your childhood? How much I did for you. How dare you pretend like you earned this? You don't know what real struggle is. But you will, when this all falls apart. Sometimes, I'd listen in the dark, phone in one hand, tears in my eyes. Not because I believed her, but because a part of me still wanted her to be the mother she pretended to be when people were watching. That part was dying fast. Then came the legal notice. Filed officially. Intent to contest the will on the grounds of undue influence and mental incompetency. My grandfather's mind, the one that never forgot my birthday, who could still quote Hemingway by memory, who helped me run a full audit of one of his stores just 5 months before he died, was now being labeled incompetent by the same woman who once forgot to pick me up from school for 3 hours because she was at a spa. I hired my own lawyer. His name was Malcolm Cross, calm, sharp, and quietly furious on my behalf. When he read the documents, he shook his head. "She's trying to break the will with hearsay and sentiment," he said. "We'll prove capacity and intent. But prepare yourself, they're going to play dirty." "I'm already dirty," I replied. "Let's fight." In the quiet of my apartment, with the city buzzing beyond the windows, I opened my grandfather's last letter one more time. "They will come at you with sweet words and sharp knives. Hold your ground, Emily. The wind howls loudest when you're standing in the open, but that's where the strongest trees grow." I whispered the last line to myself, like a prayer. Because now, I wasn't just fighting for a house, or a bank account, or a business. I was fighting for him. And I was done letting anyone, even my own mother, rewrite the truth. The courthouse didn't feel like a place of justice. It felt like a cold, echoing theater. Beige walls. Polished wooden pews. A judge's bench that loomed like a throne. And at the center of it all, me. Emily Carter. The granddaughter of Paul Matthews. And apparently, the villain of the family's new morality play. I sat beside my attorney, Malcolm Cross, who looked calm in his navy suit and wireframe glasses. He flipped through his notes like he was reading a weather report. Meanwhile, I could hear the sharp clicks of my mother's heels as she entered the room. She wore all black, again. It wasn't a funeral, but she dressed like it was one, mourning her inheritance. She slid into her chair, flanked by her legal team. 3 men in matching gray suits. On her left sat Rachel, dressed in cream and pearls, her face carefully made up to look delicate. Vulnerable. Jason wasn't there, he wanted no part in it. Craig was. Of course he was. Like a ghost who only appeared when money was on the line. Judge Elena Hawthorne presided over the case. Sharp-eyed. No nonsense. She wasted no time. "This is a hearing to address a formal challenge to the last will and testament of Paul H. Matthews, dated 9 months ago," she said. "The plaintiff, Diane Carter, alleges undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. The defendant, Emily Carter, named sole beneficiary, disputes those claims." I kept my chin high. But my palms were sweating. Malcolm stood first. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Matthews was of sound mind and acted with clear intent when drafting his will. He had legal counsel. He passed 2 separate cognitive assessments in the 6 months prior. He discussed his decisions extensively with witnesses, and, most importantly, he left behind written correspondence explicitly stating why he chose to leave his estate to his granddaughter." He tapped a folder. "We have those letters." Diane's lawyer, a man named Victor Langford, who had the oily confidence of a daytime TV host, stood next. "My client, Mrs. Carter, is devastated by the circumstances surrounding her father's will," he began. "She was shut out. Lied to. Manipulated. We will show that Mr. Matthews was isolated and emotionally coerced by Emily Carter, who had increasing access to him while his health was deteriorating. This is not about money, Your Honor. This is about justice." I nearly laughed. The first witness was Dr. Imani Graves, Grandpa's longtime physician. She sat with calm authority, answering every question with precision. Victor tried to undermine her, suggested she wasn't trained in cognitive assessments. She responded by pulling out Grandpa's test results. Mr. Matthews scored a 28 out of 30 on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. "That's within normal range," she said. He was aware of his surroundings. Knew the date, his location, his family members. He was lucid and sharp. Victor frowned. But he was 82 and dying, wasn't he? Dr. Graves nodded. Dying, yes. But not impaired. I almost smiled. That was Grandpa, stubborn, thoughtful, sharper than most people half his age. Even when the doctors told him he had 6 months, he was reading Forbes and sending me articles on succession planning. Then came the family. Rachel went first. I loved my grandfather, she said, voice trembling. We all did. But in those last months, Emily was always around. Controlling his schedule. Blocking us from seeing him. I tried to visit twice and was told he was too tired. That was a lie. I'd told her both times that she was welcome, she never showed. And Grandpa himself had asked me to screen his visitors because he didn't want drama in his final days. Malcolm asked calmly, "Did you ever write your grandfather letters?" Rachel blinked. What? Letters, Malcolm repeated. In the last 6 months. Emails? Cards? No, she said slowly. I texted sometimes. Did he reply? I don't remember. I have phone records that show he responded to Emily's messages 46 times in 3 months, Malcolm said, holding them up. He responded to yours twice, both with one-word replies. Thanks. And okay. Rachel turned pink. Would you say you had a close relationship with him at the end? She hesitated. Not exactly. No further questions. Then came Diane. I braced myself. She walked slowly to the stand, as if grief were weighing her down. She sat with a sigh, glancing toward me like she was facing Judas. I was the only child, she said softly. It was always me and my father. We didn't always get along, but I never imagined he would cut me out like this. He wasn't himself at the end. He was confused. Paranoid. He said things that didn't make sense. Such as? Malcolm asked. He told me I was a disappointment. That I'd failed him. That Emily was the only one who ever listened. That wasn't my dad. That was someone poisoned against me. Malcolm nodded. Did you ever take financial assistance from your father? She stiffened. That's irrelevant. It speaks to motive. Please answer. Diane hesitated. He helped me, from time to time. Malcolm turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have bank statements showing over $400,000 in gifts, loans, and bailouts from Mr. Matthews to Mrs. Carter over a 10-year period. The courtroom shifted. Diane's eyes narrowed. My father was generous, she spat. He never expected that money back. Maybe not, Malcolm said. But perhaps he hoped for gratitude instead of entitlement. Diane shot me a look of pure fury. For a moment, the mask slipped, and the courtroom saw the woman I'd grown up with. Not the grieving daughter. But the manipulator. The performer. And I knew then that she'd lost the jury, even if this wasn't a jury trial. The turning point came with the letters. Malcolm handed them out carefully, printed copies of Grandpa's handwritten notes to me, dated and signed in his curling script. Emily, I know this will not be easy for you. But I trust you more than I've trusted anyone. You earned that trust. Not with flattery, but with action. Your mother, I'm afraid, cannot be trusted with this responsibility. I've tried for 5 decades. I failed. That guilt will follow me. But you are my redemption. Whatever they say when I'm gone, don't waver. The truth is in your hands now. Diane tried to say the letters were forged. That I'd convinced him to write them under duress. But the forensic expert testified next. The handwriting matched. The paper was aged. The ink consistent with the pens Grandpa used. Authentic. Every word. In the end, it didn't take long. Judge Hawthorne issued her ruling the next morning. There is no credible evidence that Mr. Matthews was manipulated, coerced, or mentally incapacitated. His intentions were deliberate and well documented. The will stands. The court adjourned. My mother didn't look at me as she left. Rachel stormed out. Craig muttered something under his breath. And me? I sat there. Still. Quiet. Numb. Because while I'd won legally, emotionally, I was shattered. I hadn't just fought for money. I'd fought for my grandfather's memory. For his dignity. For the truth. But that fight had cost something. That night, I walked down to the lake house, Grandpa's favorite place. I lit a fire in the old brick hearth. I curled up on the creaky sofa with his favorite blanket and a cup of tea. I pulled out the final letter he left me. One I hadn't opened until now. If you're reading this, Em, you did it. You held the line. You did what I could not. I hope someday you understand that this wasn't about choosing you over them. It was about believing in someone who earned it, not someone who expected it. You may be alone now, but alone is not the same as lost. You'll build something better. You already are. P.S. I left the fishing rods behind the shed. If you're ever stuck on a problem, try the water. Worked for me every time. I laughed. For the first time in weeks. And I cried. Because I wasn't just mourning the man I lost, I was letting go of the girl who used to need her mother's approval. She was gone. But something stronger had taken her place. The morning after the ruling, I thought I'd feel triumphant. I thought winning would come with relief, with some sense of peace. Instead, I woke up with the weight of everything pressing down harder than before. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Emails. Missed calls. Voicemails from unknown numbers. Journalists, I guessed. And possibly family friends I hadn't heard from in years, now crawling out like mushrooms after the rain. One voicemail was just heavy breathing and then, "You'll get what's coming." I didn't recognize the voice, but I knew the sentiment. Welcome to the price of telling the truth. At the lake house, it was quiet. Too quiet. Grandpa's presence lingered in the worn leather of his armchair, the humming silence between wind chimes outside, the smell of cedar from the walls. But he was gone. And in his place was responsibility. Ownership. And a bitter aftermath I hadn't anticipated. I made a list of tasks. Open a trust. Meet with Grandpa's business managers. Handle the real estate titles. Review his stocks. It all felt surreal, like playing pretend with grown-up responsibilities I didn't ask for but suddenly had to master. But what stunned the most wasn't the work. It was who wasn't talking to me. My best friend, Natalie, had gone silent after the court hearing. We'd been close since freshman year at Duke. Roommates turned soul sisters. She'd been with me through every low, my breakup with Mason, my dad's health scare, even Grandpa's funeral. She'd helped me pack up Grandpa's things, even cried with me the night we found the old fishing photos in the lake house drawer. But now? Radio silence. I finally texted her. "Me, you good? Haven't heard from you since court. Nat, busy. Been a weird week. Me, yeah. Can we talk? Nat, soon." But soon never came. Until 3 days later, when I spotted her walking out of a downtown coffee shop with Rachel. I froze. Rachel, in her smug beige trench coat and oversized glasses. Laughing with Natalie like they were old friends. Natalie saw me and stopped mid-laugh. The smile dropped from her face like it had never been there. She walked up to me cautiously. "Hey," she said, not meeting my eyes. "You've been hanging out with Rachel?" I asked, not even bothering to hide the hurt. She reached out, Natalie said defensively. Wanted to clear the air. And what? I asked, crossing my arms. Now you're on her side? It's not about sides, she said. You're my friend. But this whole thing, it's a lot. I mean, $1 million inheritance? You never told me he was leaving you everything. I didn't know until the will was read. She sighed. I thought we told each other everything. And I thought you didn't have lunch with people who tried to ruin my life in court. Natalie looked torn. Guilt flickered across her face. Maybe I just needed perspective. You think I manipulated my dying grandfather? I don't know what to think anymore, she whispered. That's the problem. She walked away without looking back. And that's when the loneliness really hit. I didn't leave the lake house for the next 3 days. I turned off the news. Social media. Even Malcolm's messages. I needed air. Space. Silence. But silence can be loud in its own way. It echoes with every memory. On the third night, I opened a cabinet in Grandpa's office and found a dusty green ledger I'd never seen before. Inside was a list, not of financial records, but people. Names. Notes. Details. D. Carter, overdrawn character, not just bank account. Patterns never broke. C. Matthews, watch for manipulation. Emily, gifted with patience. Underestimated by most. Not by me. At the back was a sealed envelope. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Emily. If you're reading this, something has gone sideways. You're probably hurting. I'm sorry for that. But there's one more thing you need to know. A secret I kept from the whole family. Even from you. When I was 32, around your age, I almost lost everything. The business. The house. My reputation. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. Her name was Meredith Westbrook. And she was your real grandmother. I blinked. What? Your mother doesn't know. Meredith left when Diane was 6. She was troubled, addiction, instability. I tried to shield Diane from it. She grew up believing Anne, my second wife, was her birth mother. It seemed safer. Simpler. But here's the truth, Meredith came back. Once. When you were born. She held you. Just once. And said, she's going to fix what I broke. I never saw her again. But I've followed her trail. And now you'll find the final clue in the safe under my old desk. Code 0638. Don't be afraid of what you find. Love. Grandpa. My hands shook as I entered the code. Inside the safe, a photo, a faded passport, a bank slip from an account in Maine, and a letter from Meredith herself. Dear Emily. I'm probably just a shadow to you. But I want you to know I saw you once, and I knew you weren't like them. You had clarity. Light. I've lived most of my life running from things. But that moment? It's what I ran toward. You. I've kept away because I didn't want to be a weight around your neck like I was for Paul. But I've followed your life, through him. If you want answers, there's a cabin on Sugarloaf Ridge. I'll be there. Every June. For a week. Maybe someday you'll want to meet the woman whose blood you carry. Until then, I love you, quietly, from the edges. Meredith. I sat down on the office floor, letter trembling in my hand. How much didn't I know about my family? My mother? Myself? And yet, something in me softened. Not everything had to be about betrayal. Some stories were just unfinished. Waiting. Maybe this one didn't need revenge or courts or paperwork. Maybe it needed healing. That night, I went out to the lake. I brought Grandpa's old lantern and sat on the wooden dock. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning in what I'd inherited. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something entirely new. Not just wealth, but legacy. Not just family history, but choice. What would I do with the empire Grandpa left me? How could I honor him without becoming them? And what about Meredith? Did I want to meet her? Would that be opening a door that could never be shut? I looked up at the stars. They stretched forever, like Grandpa's stories. Like his quiet trust. And I realized something. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was deciding. The next morning, I called Malcolm. Let's set up the Matthews Foundation, I told him. I want to use a third of the estate for scholarships, small business grants for women, and support programs for families struggling with addiction. Are you sure? He asked. That's over $500,000. I'm sure, I said. Let them see what real legacy looks like. And just like that, the fog began to lift. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was finally living on my terms. June came faster than I expected. The trees were greener, the air thicker, and the weight on my chest lighter. It had been a month since the court's decision and since discovering the letter from Meredith. I'd made peace with the fallout. Or at least, I'd learned to stop flinching every time the phone rang. The Matthews Foundation had launched quietly but meaningfully. The first grant was awarded to a young black woman in Georgia starting her own landscaping business. Grandpa would have loved that, a return to roots, quite literally. Another scholarship was in the works for a single father finishing night school. But I hadn't told anyone where I was going now. Not Malcolm. Not Natalie. Not even the press, who were still snooping around like buzzards. This was mine. Sugarloaf Ridge in Maine wasn't on any map that tourists used. The road narrowed the farther I drove, trees bowing over like sentinels protecting a secret. I had only Grandpa's directions from his ledger and a nearly faded photo of a cabin on a lake. When I finally arrived, I didn't need confirmation. It felt like blood memory. The cabin was small. White wood, chipped and weathered. A red rocking chair on the porch, swaying slightly in the breeze. It didn't look abandoned, but not exactly lived in either. Like a place caught between years. I stepped onto the porch and knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Then I heard a creak from inside. The door opened slowly. And there she was. She wasn't what I expected. Meredith Westbrook, my biological grandmother, looked like an aged version of me. Tall. Thin. Pale green eyes with silver strands running wild through her chestnut hair. She wore a denim jacket over a floral dress, barefoot on the wooden floor. She blinked slowly. Emily. Just hearing her say my name gave me goosebumps. I wasn't sure you'd come, she added. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. She stepped aside without a word, letting me in. The cabin was warm. Not in temperature, in feeling. Books lined the walls. Handwritten recipes taped to the fridge. A watercolor of a baby girl on the mantel. You painted that? I asked, pointing to the portrait. She smiled. Yes. From memory. You were so quiet. Barely cried when I held you. There was no tension. Just a strange, mutual awe. Like meeting someone you've never met but somehow already know. We spent the afternoon talking. She told me her story, not the cleaned-up version Grandpa once implied, but the jagged truth. She'd battled addiction since she was 16. Pills at first. Then vodka. By the time she was 24, she'd abandoned Diane and disappeared across state lines. Grandpa had looked for her, sent money through a family lawyer, but eventually gave up when the disappearances grew longer. I was a ghost in my own life, she said. She got clean at 35. Too late, she whispered. At least, that's what I told myself. Too late to fix anything. Too late to be a mother again. Then she met a man named Carl in a recovery group. They built this cabin together. He died 10 years ago. Since then, Meredith had lived quietly. Reading. Painting. Writing in journals she never sent. I never reached out because I thought it would hurt more than help. I looked at her, this woman with so much of my face, and said, "He never stopped thinking about you. He told me about your one visit. After I was born." She swallowed hard. It was the last brave thing I did for a long time. I reached into my bag and pulled out Grandpa's envelope. "I think he always hoped you two might find peace. Somehow." Meredith held it like a sacred object. Tears welled in her eyes but never fell. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped into the lake, golden reflections rippling like liquid glass. "I'm not sure what I was hoping to find here," I finally said. "Sometimes it's not about finding," Meredith replied. "Sometimes it's just about being found." That line hit me like thunder. And in that moment, I realized I'd been waiting for someone to tell me who I was supposed to become. But no one could. Not my grandfather, as wise as he was. Not my mother, as bitter as she became. Not Meredith, not the court, not the foundation. It had to be me. We didn't say goodbye when I left, just next June. I drove back to the airport with the windows down, letting the forest wind whip my hair and dry the tears I didn't know had fallen. Back home, I returned to the lake house. The dock had a fresh coat of paint. I'd hired a local boy, Isaiah, whose family ran a hardware shop Grandpa used to visit. He reminded me of myself at 15, observant, eager, soft-spoken. I offered him a part-time internship helping me run the foundation's day-to-day operations. "Why me?" he asked. "Because I see the same fire in you that Grandpa saw in me," I said. He beamed. That evening, I wrote my first letter in a new journal. A letter to my future daughter. Or maybe just to myself. You'll hear stories about inheritance, about trust funds and real estate and family wealth. But the truth is, the most dangerous and precious thing we inherit is pain. The kind no one talks about. The grudges. The unspoken bitterness. The loyalty expected without question. You get to decide what to carry forward, and what to leave behind. I left behind guilt. I carried forward love. The kind that builds foundations, not walls. 2 weeks later, I got an email from Natalie. Subject: I owe you an apology. She'd seen a news article about the Matthews Foundation. How it was helping women with incarcerated partners and kids trying to go to college. She admitted Rachel had tried to twist the story even after court. Told her I manipulated the narrative. "I see now," the email read. "You didn't steal anything. You preserved something. I'm sorry I doubted you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." I didn't respond right away. But eventually, I did. Because closure, like inheritance, is something we all deserve. 1 year later. June again. I returned to Sugarloaf Ridge. Meredith was waiting on the porch, 2 mugs in her hands, one for her, one for me. I was no longer the confused girl who walked up trembling. I was Emily Matthews. Founder. Granddaughter. Heir. Woman. "I brought something," I said, handing her a framed photo of Grandpa Paul fishing. She smiled. He always did like trout better than people. We laughed. And I knew that this quiet, shared moment between generations, this was the true inheritance. Not stocks. Not property. but clarity. The kind you earn, not inherit. Thank you for watching. If Emily's story moved you, if you've ever battled family betrayal, struggled to claim what's rightfully yours, or just needed permission to choose yourself, then this story was for you. Drop a comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Emily's place? Hit the like button if this kept you hooked. Subscribe for more emotionally powerful, truth-twisting stories of legacy, revenge, justice, and healing.